May you forgive, accept, and love yourself fully and courageously. May you recognize and remember yourself no matter what is happening around you. May you give yourself permission to always come home and find the welcome mat in place. May you connect with kindred spirits for mutual care along the way. May the sacredness of your being always take priority over the busyness of your doing. May you know deep down in your bones that you are lovable and worthy of respect. May your soul perpetually tell your heart, mind, body, and spirit, welcome home. Let it be so, and so it is. Amen.
Welcome to the Good Life Coach podcast. I am your host, Michelle Lamoureux. The intention of this show is to awaken you to your fullest potential. Join me each week for inspiring interviews to elevate an area of your life, as well as interviews with women entrepreneurs who are creating success on their own terms. Each episode provides actionable tips to guide you to design a life you love. Hey there, it's Michelle Lamoureux, and welcome back to the Good Life Coach podcast. With almost 200 interviews done, I have to say today's interview is one that I'm so deeply excited about. And I think it's a conversation that is at the heart of what the show is about. And it's a conversation that we all need to be having. And we are going to be talking about reclaiming your authentic self. I feel like this is really at the heart of what life is and coming home to yourself. And we are so blessed today to have Dr. Thema Bryant, who is the author of Homecoming, Overcome Fear and Trauma to Reclaim Your Whole Authentic Self. And this book is like sunshine, which is how I would describe today's guest. And you guys are going to get an experience of that in a minute. I'm going to briefly introduce her. Dr. Thema Bryant is a clinical psychologist and president-elect of the American Psychological Association. She's also a professor of psychology at Pepperdine University and an ordained minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Dr. Thema earned her doctorate from Duke University and completed her postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School. With more than 20 years of experience in trauma recovery, she has appeared as a mental health expert on TV, radio, print media, and her focus of her work is raising awareness about mental health issues on her beautiful podcast called the Homecoming Podcast and on her social media platforms. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you and just so glad and grateful that you've created this space. And thank you for that framing of the book as sunshine. I love that.
Do you love it? But that's how I receive, I have to say, that is how I receive all of your work. So I was telling you before I hit record that I kind of stumbled upon your Instagram page and I was like, wow, everything she writes just speaks to my heart. And the next thing I know, I'm listening to your podcast. And in a quiet moment in my home, I'm receiving, it was the one you were doing on authenticity, which is what we're talking about today. And I wept from a deep place in my heart because the words you're speaking, I think when we cry, it's our soul remembering truth. And so you were speaking truth to my soul and my soul was allowed to receive it. Like my mind couldn't block it. My, all of the things that block the truth.
Yeah.
And it was deeply healing. And then I saw you had this book and I thought, I'm just going to pray she comes on. And here you are. So I'm so honored you're sitting here. Yes, I'm so honored you are here. So honored.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be here and so blessed to be able to share the material where people can reach it, right? Whether it's social media or podcasts or in the book, so that we can live and learn and then share as we go.
Yes, that's at the heart. I've read that in your book, that giving back is it's a part of who you are. It's what your parents taught you about how to show up in the world. And I think that's so important. But sunshine, it's like you just want to open your arms and just receive what you've put out in this book. And I just have to just full on say, everyone needs this book. I mean, overcoming fear and trauma to reclaim your authentic self. But I love the word homecoming. What is homecoming? Can you tell us in your
Yes.
words? Tell us, because that's your podcast name. This is the book.
Mhm.
What is homecoming?
Yes. To come home to yourself is to fully accept and embrace the truth of who you are without shame and without fear and without the distortions of the traumas of your past.
Yes. It's hard to shed some of that, though, isn't it?
It is.
The
It is the
shame and
battle because these experiences, they shape us and they can make us believe false things about ourselves. And then we're living based on those untruths. And so
yes,
to shed, to shake off, to heal, to, as you said, remember the
yes,
truth when it
yes,
shows up, to
yes,
recognize myself, not just the self that people have acted upon. That's where liberation is. It's very
yes,
freeing. And I desire that for everyone. We all deserve to have that, to be able to see ourselves without the delusion, without the camouflage, without the overshadowing of those experiences that dishonored us. So
mm,
my diluted self is my wounded self, but it's not the totality of who I am.
yes, yes. And I'm curious, are you there? Because I feel like when you speak, when you write, there's such a strength, there's such a power, but there's all from love. And I
Yeah,
feel like love is the homecoming. Love is where it's
right.
at. So if you're coming
Yeah,
from that place, you are fully embodied. But are
right.
you still in the dance with it? Or
Yeah,
are you there?
yeah. So I feel very free. Like I'm in
Yeah.
a season of my life where, I think often in our earlier seasons, people can get there at whatever stage, but I think in our earlier seasons, there can be such a need for acceptance and
Yes.
approval and
Yes.
validation. And people often jokingly refer to like the older woman who will say whatever comes in her mind.
yes.
And I just believe, and God bless our senior years, but I hope we don't have to wait till then to get free.
Yes.
And so, yes, I do. I feel grounded in love. I feel free. And is that perfection? No, as throughout the day or throughout the week, different things will happen. But it's when things show up that you detect it quicker,
Yeah.
and then you're able to hold on to your voice and your truth and then
Yes.
live from there. So it's not that you will never be derailed or that I'm never confused in a moment, but it takes less time to ground myself and to get clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's why it's so easy to receive what you're putting out and when you
Yeah.
speak, because
Mhm.
you're not, we'll be talking about some of the ways we get disconnected and how it shows up, like people pleasing, which I've been guilty of for so long. And it's funny because I turned 51 and I find that, and maybe that's how, I talk to you about, sometimes they say when you're ready, the teacher appears and here's your beautiful presence and your beautiful book. And it's funny how we just put these layers on. And then there's that voice that's just like, I just want to be myself. I
Yeah.
just need to remember, and you start paying attention. I have stepped back in all of my relationships in like the last 6 months. And I'm like, wait, I know what I'm putting out.
Hmm.
What am I receiving?
Right.
Is this a true
Yeah.
connection? And just
Yeah.
like every piece of my life right now is being sort of lovingly
Mm.
analyzed with
Yes.
just the curiosity, just
Right.
curiosity. Is
Right.
that part of this? I
That
mean,
is definitely a part of it, which is why, in the book, at the end of each chapter, I give a homework because
yes,
it is about the application. We can think ourselves in circles and never shift. So it's what you're saying is like, okay, this is an interesting thought. Now, how does that show up in my relationships? Right?
yes,
Because a part of homecoming is telling myself the truth and then living
yes,
out of that truth. So, what is true about this thing I'm calling a friendship? Right? What is the truth about this thing I'm calling a relationship? Right? And
yes,
then shifting and realigning so that the truth of it does not go against what I have said is my value and my priority. And
yes,
I appreciate you pointing out that what is shared in the book and the podcast really feels like it comes from a place of love because
yes,
it does. I think sometimes people can be so harsh and believe that tough love is the way to go, and they
Yeah.
can use that as a cover to be cruel. And as I am writing as someone who knows what it is intimately to forget myself, right?
Mm.
Or to dishonor and disrespect myself. So
Yes.
when I point that out in the ways it can show up in each of us, it's not with like finger waving of like, shame on you. How could you have done this terrible thing? Is
Yes.
to like really in tenderness say, I get it. I get the different ways that could have landed you there, and you don't have to stay there.
Yes. Right. This is an invitation. This is an
Yes.
invitation. Come home to
Yeah.
yourself.
Right.
You,
Right.
yeah. You write in the book, you talk about how stress and trauma can lead to self-abandonment. And I think that's an important word,
Mhm.
self-abandonment, because that truly is what's happening, right? It's
Right.
we putting the focus on everyone else and how do we
Yeah.
conform and bend and twist ourselves to be
Right.
acceptable and not feel shame or,
Mhm.
self-loathing or whatever somebody might be feeling.
Right.
And you write, to begin the journey, can you admit to yourself that you miss you?
Mhm.
That was like, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then
Yeah.
you say, not only do I miss myself, but I want to get back to me. I want to rediscover my wings. Love
Mm.
that too. I want to hear my unfiltered roar, my true voice. I want to awaken to my dormant gifts. And that's kind of at the heart of the show. It's like I talk about these
Mhm.
inner whispers we have.
Yeah.
How do you add more of you back to your life?
Mhm.
If you're
Mhm.
constantly managing what everyone else wants and
Right.
needs,
Yeah.
what are you giving to you, right?
That's right. That's right. The self abandonment, self erasure, self neglect is the other side of the coin of people pleasing.
Yes.
And so if I'm constantly trying to figure out what you need and what you want, then I'm not paying any attention to what I need and what I want. And I'm
Yes.
so busy anticipating ways I can please you while I am unfulfilled. So
Yes.
it's putting myself back in my own frame instead of in the margins.
Yes. I'm not going to speak for all moms, but I think moms get into this
Mhm.
pattern really easily too.
Yeah.
They may have
Yeah.
done more for themselves. Like I know I was sort of guilty, and then you stop taking those classes, you stop
Mhm.
engaging in different ways, and everything
Right.
becomes about the kids,
Yes,
and you
and
kind of
it's
lose
true.
yourself. Yes.
This past week's episode was for parents who still have dreams, because often it does get presented, especially for mothers,
Yes.
that, motherhood should be your sole dream and that somehow you're a bad mother if you have any goals or visions that are beyond motherhood.
Right.
And, it is such a setup for us to disconnect from ourselves and for us to not only judge ourselves, but judge each other.
Yes.
Like, how dare she be doing those things? What about the children? Right?
Right.
You
Who's
know,
watching the kids? Yeah.
yes, yes. So we want to create space for the fullness of who we are, that you can
Yeah.
be very much loving your friendships, relationships, family, and also have dreams and have a self, right?
Yes.
That being a
Yes.
mother is a part of yourself, but that is not the full story of yourself.
That's right. That's right. And that is actually what prompted me to start this podcast. That's
Ah,
actually what,
yeah,
is sort of to invite other women like myself. I think we
yes.
teach and we write and
Mm-hmm.
about kind of where we're at and where we're trying
Right.
to expand into. And it's an ever going journey.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be, open to just sharing some of your stories, like how
Yeah.
you decided, like how did you get to the point? Because I know you're obviously a clinical psychologist, so you're
Mm-hmm.
studying all this stuff, but at
Right.
what point were you like, this is where it's at. Like, I really need to come back to myself. Because even in your
Mm-hmm.
profession, you could totally just be giving all the time and not
Right.
addressing your own stuff, right? Isn't that
Yes.
true?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think a part of what helps this message to resonate for me is along with having a private practice, I'm a professor in graduate school at Pepperdine
Yes.
University. And so I am, being able to help shape in this formative season future mental health professionals. And so to talk to them about what it means to live it, not just to do it in a performance way for other people. So I
Yes.
tell the story in the book about when I first started off and I was handling my own calendar, I kept scheduling clients in my lunch break because it was this idea. I would put up this, false dichotomy of what's more important, help them or have a sandwich.
Or
So it's
nourish
like
your
such
body.
a ridiculous way to frame it. But of course, then I would just schedule someone and like see people all day long. And then, had this moment of truth when I'm talking with a client about how she should care for herself. And my stomach
Yes.
starts growling. And it's
Yes.
like, whoa. I had to have a meeting with myself to say, do I just want to say these things or do I want to live it? Right.
Yes.
And so that's what I tell our graduate students. You will be praised and applauded for forgetting about yourself and doing what everybody else wants you to do to be of service to others. But if you are empty, it's not worth it. That
Mm.
you're deserving of the care you so much want to give to other people. And
Ah.
so, part of then that messaging of homecoming, it echoes in my teaching, it echoes in my mentorship, it echoes for when I'm working with clients who are parents or caretakers, or because of trauma history are disconnected. It's like sometimes people don't even know what they feel, because we have been made to doubt ourselves. So when it's like, how do you feel about that? I don't know. Or, with teenagers, it's often, I don't care.
Yes.
Meanwhile, you do care. You do
Yes.
care.
Yes.
So to help us to reclaim ourselves, our feelings, our voice, our needs, our dreams, and to know that that's important.
Yeah. Do you think that's why we're here?
Yeah.
Khalil Gibran, the author of The Prophet, he's one of my
Yeah.
favorite poets.
Yes.
And he talks about, you can't have joy without pain.
Mhm.
So we wouldn't know what joy was if we didn't have pain. But do you think, you experienced some traumas in your life? I think most of us experience some level of trauma. Some can be way more extreme than others, right? I mean, with war, places of war, we see what's happening.
Mhm.
But do you think that's part of the path?
Mhm. Well, it is the reality of life because people get to make choices.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm talking about, interpersonal trauma.
Yes.
So some people choose to honor, to respect, to love. Some people choose uh, their own broken egos over the wellness and wholeness of others. So
Mm.
then that creates harm in the world. And then there are also traumas that aren't about necessarily people. You say like natural disasters, but
Yes.
a medical condition, all of these experiences. And I think it's important to name it as a part of the life journey because there are some teachings that promote the idea that if you're like a spiritual person or have the right thoughts, like nothing bad will happen to you. Like this
Right.
idea that we create our whole reality. So if anything
Yes.
bad happened, you made it happen. So
Yes.
that, is that toxic spirituality.
Yes.
And it promotes an illusion of control.
Mm.
Right. So and of course, it's attractive. People would love that idea.
Yeah.
Right. So then it's
Yes.
like, if anything, I can make only good things happen to me. Well, the reality is in social psychology, there's that concept of belief in a just world. And so if I believe in a just world, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people.
Mm.
So if something bad happened to you, it must be your fault. So
Mm.
we have to free ourselves from that falsehood and know, these storms come and to know then the storm does not define me. It affects me, but it does not capture me.
Oh, I love that so much. I actually wanted to ask you, and it's since you touched upon this,
Yeah.
there's this idea that the love you put out in the world is what comes back to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think
Right.
that's true.
Yeah. You can be a
Is
very
that it?
loving person and people treat you in harmful ways. We can take it a simple example is child abuse.
Yes.
Kids show up, these kids aren't like vicious, malicious people. Be a
Right.
very loving child, and adults can act out their brokenness on them. So, and also in the relationship space, when people are in abusive relationships, if you just say, well, you must have caused this person to abuse you, it's like very victim blaming, and it's
Yes.
just false.
Yeah. I think that's
Because
important.
what one of the points I often make in sessions with people is, for some people, there is not a problem with how you were navigating or operating in a relationship. The problem is it was with the wrong person, right? So, in other
Yes.
words, if I'm with someone and I am perpetually looking for ways to benefit them, and they are perpetually looking for ways to benefit themselves.
That's the only thing you have in common then.
Right, that's what, yeah. You are our common priority, and there's no water flowing in this direction, right? Yeah.
Okay, well, that's helpful. But, they say sometimes, look at the state of your reality, and it's like, this idea
Mhm.
that that's what you're putting out, but that's not the
Yeah.
case.
Right. Because I think that also goes with, people call it the prosperity gospel, which would be like, if you love God and do the right things, like that, you will financially prosper, which
Yes.
promotes the idea then that rich people are righteous and poor people are unrighteous. And it's just
Yes,
not
not
true.
true. No, it's not true. Well, I think that's helpful to just have that like understanding. But at the same time, there are things, this is an invitation to do the work,
Yes.
because coming home to yourself is not an easy process, because it may mean losing relationships. It may mean letting go a part of yourself that you identified with that kept you safe. Right.
Yeah.
So there's so much letting go that needs to happen. So it
Right.
requires courage and awareness and curiosity. Can you speak to more of like, like how do we get on this? Like, what is disconnecting us, generally speaking? I mean, obviously it's going to be different, but there's obviously must be some patterns
Sure.
and ways to get reconnected. How do
Yeah.
we, people like tangible things like that they can play with. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So stress and trauma
Yes.
disconnect us from ourselves.
Yes.
They put us in survival mode, right? So if I'm having to work a million hours, and so then it's just like work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep, then it can be very easy to lose sight of me because I'm
Yes.
just trying to do what I need to do to cover these bills. So when people say, how are you? Fine. And you, right? It's very like surface. There's not even
Yes.
like, some people say, I don't even have the space to be depressed, right? That
They're
there's so
afraid to
much.
check in because then they'd have
Yeah.
to like, maybe they'd fall to
Yes.
pieces or something.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So when you have a lot of demands and pressures on you, you can disconnect with who you are. And
Yes.
also when you have had these traumatic experiences, so molestation, living in communities where there's a lot of violence, the
Yes.
realities of oppression, all of these things can tell us lies about ourselves as we're trying to make meaning, right? So when people have been mistreated by more than one person or by their primary caregivers, then you can understand how they would conclude it must be something about me, right? That other people have
Yes.
a loving mother or a loving father, and I didn't. So, like, maybe I'm not as good as those other people, right?
Yeah.
Because somehow I wasn't deserving of that. So then you can walk around with the fear of abandonment and this sense of
Yes.
insecurity and not wanting people to really know you because emotional intimacy is scary if I'm afraid that if I let you see me, you're not going to like what you see. Right. So then I have to hold you at a distance or I have to keep dating people who are emotionally unavailable.
I
I
did that.
right, yes.
I had that season. I had that season.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So
Hmm.
it's, as you said, it keeps you safe. And as you named, it is challenging because for many of us, we've done it a long time.
Yeah.
So then you associate that with the truth of who you are, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes I say in the book, for some people, it's homecoming for the first time, that you were
Mm,
never safe enough to be at home within yourself.
yeah.
And so even though it's home, it's like I've never been there or not been there as an adult, right? And so to recognize just because something is familiar doesn't mean that it's you, right?
Yes.
It's familiar because that's how you have had to like do that dance your whole life, but now wanting to take sacred pause and breath, and as you said, reassess and evaluate, this is how I survived, but I want to do more than survive. And perhaps this no longer serves me, and maybe it never did.
Yes.
So these concrete strategies, I talk about emotional intelligence. And so beginning to tell myself the truth about what I feel,
Yes.
right? And to start communicating our feelings instead of like, it doesn't matter to me, or no, I'm good, right? I'm fine. I'm perfect, right? I'm
Yeah.
fabulous.
Everything. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
everything. So it's like public relations. So to
That's
cultivate,
great.
right?
True.
It's like, how are you? Fabulous, really magnificent.
Right. Everything's amazing.
And a part of what's freeing is knowing you can feel more than one thing at the same time, right?
Mm,
So you may genuinely feel that you're blessed and also be worried about some things, right? Because
yes.
sometimes people think, if I say that, that means I'm not grateful. I can have a
Yes.
lot of gratitude for what's going right and still have concerns about the areas that are not going well, right?
Yes.
And so to start coming home to yourself, give yourself permission to check in of what is true of what you feel, and to notice what emotions you haven't had permission to feel,
Mm,
right? Some of us grew up in households or cultures or by gender where certain emotions weren't okay. And so then, for example, with men, sometimes the anger can be a cover for embarrassment. The
mm.
anger can be a cover for fear. The anger can be a cover for grief. So it's like, I see you doing all of what you're doing, but what's really underneath there,
Yes.
right? And, for women, we're often told, to never have a complaint and never, get angry. And so even in the face of disrespect, this idea that you just, have to be pleasant and
Yeah.
pleasing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's when you read that quote about finding your roar. You have a voice, and there have been experiences that have told you not to use it, but to reclaim your voice. So to practice speaking up for yourself. Some people, it will help to like role play first. If they're going to have to go in for a meeting with a supervisor or to talk to a loved one, to kind of practice through and thinking honestly about the different ways people might respond. Because
Yes.
sometimes we do role plays and we imagine people saying what we want them to say.
Yeah. And then they don't.
Right, that's right. So preparing for, what if they don't believe you? What if they don't agree? Can you still feel free and appreciate yourself that you said what you needed to say or what you wanted to say?
Yes.
So that's a part of our homecoming.
I love that. And I remember that part of the book too, because I thought that was important. And also when somebody says something that you don't like, to take a moment, that you don't
Yeah,
actually have to just react and just
right,
make it better, but you can actually sit with it and take a moment to just take it in and just then really come back and speak your truth, because
right.
this is where it's at, is reclaiming your voice. And I think I find, I mean, you're so present with your voice that I find, like I said, I'm still working through this.
Mm-hmm,
It's funny, the
mm-hmm.
book that I'm writing a fiction book, the songs that I write, it's all about this. And I think because it's, it wants to come back. Do you find in your life being so comfortable with using your voice
Mm-hmm.
that life flows in a different way than it did before?
Yes, it does. There is less regret. I think a
Mm,
lot of times, so I'm one of those people who, even though I have voice, I can, I'm also a thinker. So
yeah.
it can be a delayed reaction, right?
Okay.
And so at first I would compare myself to other people. So my brother and one of my very good friends, they're like quick with the comeback, right? They could both be lawyers if they wanted to, right? Where, of course, as the therapist sitting and thinking, it can be hours later where I'm like, now what I should have said. But the gift has been learning to circle back, right? That because some people just want to process or it just doesn't come to them immediately.
Yeah.
If it's a stranger on the street, then okay, that was a lost moment. I won't get that back.
Yeah.
But usually these moments are happening with people we're doing life with, whether
Yes.
in work or personal or friendship. And so to be able to say, I want to go back to a comment you made the last time we were talking, and then, proceed from there.
Mhm.
And one of the things I say in the book is if you show up more authentically and then people don't like you, at least now you all are operating in truth. Because if you like me, but it's just based on me agreeing with everything you say, we're not actually friends. You just like yourself.
I love it. Right. Because you're getting your needs met, but
Right.
it's not a two-way. It's like you
That's
said,
right.
the water's not flowing back to the
Yeah.
other direction. It's only
Yes.
going one
Yes.
direction. And that's not
Mhm.
healthy for anyone.
Mhm.
Um, you wrote, and I was thinking a lot about this because when I talk about the inner whispers, you talk about your work being your vocation. I'm
Mhm.
curious, do you believe we all have a vocation?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
how do we get aligned with that dream that God has for us? Like,
Yes.
how do we do that?
Yeah. So I love this quote, which I think I include in the book by Howard Thurman, who was a Black theologian. And he says, do the thing that makes you come alive because far too few of us are actually alive. And so that's how you know. The same way people will talk about, like, do you just like this person or do you feel more alive with them? Like,
Mm,
when you're discerning relationship. And
yes.
I would say around vocation as well, if you're a smart person or a hardworking person, there are many things you could do,
Yes.
right? But what are the things you feel drawn to? What are the things that when you're doing them, it's fulfilling? So an example I often give people is, when I teach at our graduate program, the classes are 3 hours long. Now, someone who doesn't want to teach, that will sound like torture.
Yes.
And for me, it's like we've been going for 3 hours and there's 10 minutes left and I have a million thoughts. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like we're out of time. How did this happen? So, I'm in the space that is for me, or when I'm providing therapy, my area of expertise is trauma recovery. And some people hear that and they're like, how could you do that? I wouldn't want to hear people's problems all day.
Hmm.
But that's not how it feels to me. Like
Yes.
I feel honored, and I feel amazed in awe of people because given the lives we have lived, people are remarkable.
Yes.
So, but I get it's not for everyone, just like there are, a good friend of mine works on computers all day. I mean, now because of COVID, many of us do, but I mean, literally doesn't have a lot of interpersonal interaction, and they
Yes.
like that. Like
Ah,
I would want to talk to people.
me too.
So and I think a part of what can be freeing for you, for each of us, is releasing other people's hierarchies
Hmm.
because people will come in with their dreams, right? Sometimes parents try to put their dreams on their kids, or other people will promote these ideas of what you should do. So I was working with a young lady, and her family kept trying to encourage her to get what they would call a good government job.
Hmm.
Like a good government job, you can have
Yep. Get
benefits,
your pension. Yeah.
stability, right? And she's an artist,
Mm,
right? So
yes.
that's a different life. And so you have to say, like, am I going to go work in a cubicle, for the next, the decades of my life? Or am I going to try this dream? And, when she is acting, she comes alive. Then you just got to figure out how we're going to pay the rent.
That's the thing. It's aligning the
Yeah.
vocation with making a living,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that
Yes,
part of it? Is that part of the journey? Is that part of it? Is
it
like
is.
having enough faith and trust?
Right.
Do you find that God, they say like God will meet you halfway if you show up? It,
Yeah. It is one of those things. And I'll say both, and because I do want to be very understanding and clear that not everybody has support, right? There's
yes.
some people, they could just pursue any dream and their parents are bankrolling it, and
Yes.
blessings to them. And there are other people who are having to work two waitressing jobs to try to pursue their dream on the off hours.
Yeah.
So it's not an even playing field, but trying to figure out, how do I protect time to pursue my dream even if I'm not able to do it at this point full time? And then the statement you just made about when you step out, kind of in faith, does that create more opportunities?
Yeah.
And I would say yes, like you can't get the job you don't apply for.
Right.
Right. And even, around love, some people just go to work and come home and are like, where's my person? I'm like, unless it's the delivery man, where are you going to,
Who else is going
where
to
are they
knock
going to
at your
come from?
door?
Right.
Yes. He's not just going to be like, I'm here. God sent
Right.
me. Yeah.
Right.
I got the
Yeah.
memo. Yeah.
Right. Right. So
Yeah.
putting yourself in position for things to happen.
Yeah. Do you believe in synchronicities?
Yes.
Okay, because I've lived that. So do you find when you're more true to yourself, your authentic self, following what lights you up and without fear, having more of that faith that things start to just show up?
Yes, it lines up. Well, here's the other thing. When I am pretending or when I am erasing myself, I'm putting up false flags. So then, but when I show up in my truth, then it's a flag. So then people know, like, oh, that's what you stand for. So let me come in alignment with that, right? So I'll give you this by way of example. Over 10 years ago, I was president for the Society of the Psychology of Women. And so, it's a feminist psychological association. And as president, I had several initiatives, and one of them was looking at the roles of spirituality and religion in women's lives.
Yes.
Now, publicly, the organization and a lot of people only spoke negatively about faith because they would say sexism, patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. And yet I know that women are more likely to endorse spirituality, faith, and religiosity. So if we're going to say we're committed to the psychology of women and we can't even tune into that, like, we're missing it.
Yes.
So when I announced this initiative, then suddenly during the break, I had all these women coming up to me whispering, I'm Episcopalian. I'm like, I'm Catholic, right? So it's like, why is it a secret? So when you give space, or I'm also an artist, and so then I discover all these people who are into both health and artistry, which I love. When you mentioned writing songs, I didn't even know that, right? So when you show up as who you are, then you're identifying yourself. And kindred spirits, like-minded people and opportunities will say, oh, that's a person we can go to for that. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. You use so many good words there in terms of erasing yourself, right? I mean, wow, but that's reality. I mean, I think, and this is the invitation, I hope everyone listening today just I don't know, just softens and like pays attention to the conversations they're having, what's showing up, how they're truly feeling versus, you talked about social media and compulsive shopping and overeating. Like, there's so many ways to numb and to just like get distracted from truth.
Right.
But this is an invitation to come back to your truth.
Yeah. So it's important for us to really do an inventory, self-assessment of what are the ways I've been numbing myself.
Yeah.
And often we demonize, pathologize other people's ways of numbing and don't pay attention to our own.
Yeah, it's easier to say, oh, she's
look
whatever.
at them.
Yeah.
They're on drugs. Oh my goodness. Right.
Right.
But as you name, shopping can be a way. Stalking your ex or stalking celebrities can be a way. Gossiping can be a way. Zoning out in front of like hours of television can be a way that we numb ourselves. And emotional eating can be a way where, like, at midnight, you're not actually hungry. You're hungry for something, but it's not just food, right? And so it's a more painful thing of like to pay attention to the emptiness, right? What is it that is really empty, and how do I feed that?
Yes, because you talked about you have to sit in the silence. You have to. This is the inner work. Right. And you're not going to find that. And the pint of ice cream might give the spike of the sugar, whatever that does to the brain, that hit. But it's not going to heal what needs to be healed.
Yeah. Yeah. And can then set us up on this vicious cycle, right? Because I do that to quote unquote treat myself and then end up feeling worse about myself. Right. So it's a vicious cycle.
Absolutely. I'm curious, how does being an ordained minister and sort of inform your life view? Because not only are you a clinical psychologist, but this is an interesting piece that most clinical psychologists don't have.
Right. Absolutely. I love it for several reasons, but one is it gives me the vocabulary and the knowledge to have the communication across areas. So a lot of times, mental health professionals, as opposed to not even speaking well of faith, often it's not even on the table.
Yeah.
So what happens, so there's research that shows that on average, mental health professionals endorse lower spirituality and religiosity than the general public.
Mm.
So then, if you have people largely not of faith creating healing interventions for people for whom spirituality is central,
Yes.
right? They're going to miss some
There's
things
a
because it's not
disconnect.
even in the conversation.
Yeah.
And so then I say to my students, you could be working with someone for months and you don't actually know that person, right? Because their spirituality is their center.
Yeah.
So,
That's the faith is what keeps them
right.
going. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And
Yes.
so, and then on the flip side, in some spiritual spaces, there can be a real dismissal of mental health,
Mm.
right? So, again, that idea of like, if you're spiritual enough or detached enough or meditate enough, then you shouldn't have anger or you shouldn't have despair or you like, and it's like, trying to create these robots that, like, if I'm like Zen, right, then nothing phases me, right? So, let's have
Right.
our space for our humanity and that's healthy, right?
Yes.
So it allows me to enter those spaces, I would say, with a high level of respect, because
Mm.
sometimes either like faith communities can speak in ways that are like disrespectful of mental health, and mental
Yes.
health professionals can speak in ways that are disrespectful of faith.
Yes.
So, and most people hold both, right? I want
Yes.
emotional wholeness and I'm a spiritual being. And so, yes, you shouldn't have to leave either of those out in order to do your healing work.
Yes. So beautiful. You talk about spiritual understandings and practices. There's a big
Mhm.
section in the book about that. Um, how do we what are some of the most impactful practices that we can start awakening to and incorporating in our lives just from your own
Yes.
experience? Because there's so
Hmm.
many, right, to tap into,
Right.
but what do you find is the
Yeah.
most impactful?
For me, what's a most important one is you're having a spiritual practice at the beginning of your day.
Mm,
Before you get into like ripping and running or jumping out of bed to start doing for other people or jumping on the
yes.
phone, is like taking those moments at the start of your day to center in. And what your particular ritual or practice will look like may vary by person. So, for some people, prayer at the beginning of the day or meditation. For some people, listening to music that is either going to soothe you or animate you or focus you. For some people, movement. So starting the day with some dancing or some
Yeah.
stretching to get into your body.
Yes.
Um, and also for me, I love like reading sacred texts. So whether for people that will be scripture, whether that will be poetry, what are the things that feed you so that then when I show up to the world, I'm not easily moved. And I also don't
Mm.
show up to work thirsty, right?
Wow.
When I haven't fed myself, then
Mm.
I'm really like looking for this validation and approval. But when I'm already centered, it's nice if people appreciate what I'm doing. But even if they don't, like I'm already grounded, I'm already clear.
Mm.
I'm not, and I say, especially if you're in a service work or if you're a parent, it may not be like a million thank yous, right? And so you can't emotionally like need that from that particular work, right? Or
Yes.
your parenting relationship. So you want to feed yourself in the
Yes.
morning so that you can show up already at home.
So beautiful. And so that's mind, body, spirit, though. So
Yeah.
you were talking about the soul feeding, right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that the idea of thirsty, but you also do talk about taking care of your physical body
Right.
too, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that's another part of self neglect. So I can emotionally neglect myself with no boundaries or not
Mhm.
paying attention to what I feel. But physical self neglect is another important one. And that's from the reparenting chapter of, if I'm living out of vending machines or fast food and needing to, I started this piece of like before I eat something, be able to say, I'm eating this because I love myself.
Oh, that's so
Right.
nice.
It will make you think again because if we have to shift our script, we often call the unhealthiest things treats, right? So if my idea of a treat
True.
is the
Yeah.
thing that's shortening my life, is that really a treat? Right?
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. I'm wondering, we're coming close to the end, and I could ask you so many different things, but I'm just curious. I'm just going to take a moment just because there's like so many pieces. You talked about poetry, and I'm just wondering, like, what role does writing or like
Mhm.
tuning in? Do you journal with God? Do you
Yes.
what's your relationship? How do you get tuned into, because maybe you're like, I know there's more, but God, I don't know what it is. Show me. Like,
Mhm.
how do you do that? What's your
Yeah.
process?
Yes. So I will say writing is definitely a clarifying space for me and a releasing space. So not only to get new insight, but to also express what I'm carrying,
Mm,
right? So a lot of us are holding in things, and the expressive arts are a beautiful way to express, to release, to convey.
yeah.
And so, yes, spending time, and whether you like to do creative writing like poetry or short stories, or whether it's journaling, or some people write out their prayers. And I know
Mm,
some people will then write the prayer and the response to the prayer. Um, and so it is a great way of homecoming because it's you and the paper, separate from everybody else's opinions.
yes.
Right.
It gives you space to actually hear your own voice.
Right.
Why
Right.
is it so? It's beautiful on your podcast that you read other people's poetry. How did that
Mhm.
come about? I thought that was really beautiful. And wow, some of that poetry is just beyond.
Amazing.
It's
Amazing.
amazing. You
Yeah.
could publish a book just on
Right,
like
on the submitted poems.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
true. I
Yes.
love it, especially because my podcast is not interview style.
Yes.
So it's a way of bringing in other voices,
Yeah.
and also helping people to document their process. So it kind of evolved naturally
Mm,
because I think it was probably the second episode, maybe the homework assignment was for people to write vows to themselves.
okay.
That we often focus on wedding vows and what I'm going to vow to other people, and to take pause from that and say, what do you vow to yourself? Right? Will you be with yourself in sickness and in health? Will you
Mm,
love yourself for richer or for poor? Right? And so we start to ask these questions. So I said on when I gave that homework, if you want to share your vows, send them in. And then some people's vows were poems. So I
wow.
was like, whoa. And so then I said, well, and so I started saying, if you have vows and or poetry that you would like me to share, send it in.
How healing
And,
and
as you
beautiful.
heard, it's so rich.
Yeah, I find that I write poetry when I'm sad. Like it's a way of
Mhm.
healing or processing, or even the song,
Right.
one of them is funny. It's called Free to Be Me.
Ah, I love it.
I
Yes.
wrote it 10 years ago, but it tells you it's
Ah,
sort of, yeah.
wow.
You've been so generous. I'm going to leave this to you, but anything you want to leave the women with today, it could be something from your book, from your heart. I'll just turn that over to
Yeah,
ask you what you feel like sharing.
absolutely. I will uh, read to you all a part of the closing blessing, just the
Please.
last page of Homecoming. And so it is my hope and desire for each of us to make it home. And even when we get derailed or distracted, to know that's not final, that you
Mm,
can come back to yourself.
okay.
And so may you forgive, accept, and love yourself fully and courageously. May you recognize and remember yourself no matter what is happening around you. May you give yourself permission to always come home and find the welcome mat in place. May you connect with kindred spirits for mutual care along the way. May the sacredness of your being always take priority over the busyness of your doing. May you know deep down in your bones that you are lovable and worthy of respect. May your soul perpetually tell your heart, mind, body, and spirit, welcome home. Let it be so, and so it is. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful.
Mm.
Everyone needs to get your sunshine into their hearts. So where do they find you? What's your favorite
Yes.
place for people to connect with you, and they can get your book, and
Yes,
they can
please.
earmark it and underline it in a million places like
Oh,
I
good.
did.
Please do. I love that.
Yes.
So my website is Dr. Thema, DRTHEMA.com. And from there, you can see links to get the book. And it's at all major bookstores and also indie bound for those who want to support independent bookstores. I'm in social media, Instagram and Twitter primarily. Just started TikTok last month. And so there are some videos there that actually include excerpts from the podcast, but with visual imagery. So I've connected with two beautiful sisters who have been turning the words into visuals.
Wow.
So I'm excited about that.
Wow. Well, I will link everything over at thegoodlifecoach.com in the show notes so people can find it, or head directly over to drthema.com's website and pick up a copy of Homecoming. You will be so glad that you did. And so much gratitude for your beautiful heart and the work you're doing in the world. Just immense gratitude, and really such an honor to be sitting with you today. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you. I love the conversation, and many blessings to you and all of your initiatives and your music.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't do anything with it. It's for me. I don't know what to do with it. We can leave that to a higher power, I guess. Yeah. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you gained some new information or inspiration for your life. That the essence of this show is to really wake up to what's possible for you, to reclaim your beautiful voice, and to really learn to love and prioritize yourself. So if you gained any value from any of the conversations you've tuned into, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player. You can do that right now on your phone. And please do consider leaving a rating and review if you have yet to do so on Apple Podcasts. It's actually how more women can find the show. And I really want to grow a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you as always for tuning in. And I look forward to reconnecting with you next Wednesday. Bye for now.